Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about communication and documentation. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you think that software engineers should write a lot of documentation both at work and outside to expand their thinking process and improve their communication skill? No, I don't think so, because, well, this is just me, but personally believe that documentation, depending on how you look at it, at the very least, is a necessary evil. I don't want to badmouth, I mean, good documentation is like a godsend, but when when you're writing documentation, the problem of documentation is that documentation in many ways it's like code, but it's actually more difficult than code, because depending on how you write it, the information that you put in your documentation might become outdated very, very quickly. It's a classic one where you try to write sort of what a function does or what a module does or what a specific product is doing, and you try to define it as best as you can, and then it sort of tries to encapsulate a larger perspective, if that makes sense. And then that larger perspective changes, or there's critical things that are added that sort of now lost in the documentation, and now it's sort of actually not that useful anymore. And so I have tried to follow the rule to write as little documentation as I can, but this documentation that I do write should be very, very useful and direct, and have a direct, almost daily if possible, or very frequent value to the person who is going to consume it. That sounds very fluffy, but what it really just means is that I try to only document things that I know are very important to document, because if I don't, people will not be able to progress with their work, or they won't really be able to understand what they need in order to make progress on whatever task they're working on, or what goal they're trying to achieve. Because that's the thing about documentation, it depends on who the reader is, how you structure things, and so you have to sort of pick your audience. And my audience are usually people who are trying to do something in the code, or trying to figure out how something works, or so forth and so forth. But as a means for you to expand your thinking or your way of communicating, not so much. I think that the way, if we're gonna split those two out into separate things, if you want to improve your communication skills, well, that's a very broad thing. That's sort of like saying, I want to get into shape, therefore I'm going to do push-ups. Sure, that is a way for you to build some type of strength, but if your end goal is to, I don't know, bulk up, or like become a long distance runner, there are other ways of achieving that. And the same thing goes for communication. You can be very communicative in writing. You can be it in speech. You can be it in listening or emotional, like intelligence. Like, there are so many factors to communication. I like, actually, it's one of my favorite things. And when you do a retro, you just wait. I promise you, if you work for long enough, someone at some point is gonna say, "We need to communicate more," and then you're gonna create an action from your retro with the card saying, "Communicate more." Because every single team I've ever worked with, in every company since the dawn of my career, has always, at least a few times, put up one of those things where we should communicate more, because for some reason people didn't like include people, or so forth and so forth, in their process, and something went bad because they didn't talk to each other before they did stuff. And that's a task that cannot be solved. How do you just decide to communicate more? Just as how do you try to improve your communication skills? It's actually very simple. You identify in what areas you want to be effective. Just as with sports, you identify what type of strengths you are looking for. If you're looking for to lose weight or build muscles or whatever, what are you trying to achieve? Because it's too high level to say you're just going to get into shape, or you're just going to learn how to communicate. And then you focus on that area. So, for example, if you're looking to improve your communication skills in terms of speech, talking to other people, then go and talk to other people. sit in on meetings, join discussions, etc., etc. If you're looking at trying to become a better writer or someone who knows how to write things in a way that makes it comprehensible to other people, some people say, hey, go take a writing class, and I go, no, don't do that. Go and write software. Write code reviews, feedback to other people's software, and practice explaining your thinking process in the context of coding to another person. And when you do that, try to do, maybe I like to do this, if I find that writing things on GitHub or something like that on a pull request doesn't really work, then I ask, could we take a few minutes and just do a video conference, and I'll try to explain my thinking, and then I go over to speak or to like verbal communication. This works really well, and it is sort of the same thing as I was saying. If you're looking to improve in something, it's better for you to find yourself in the arena of the thing that you're trying to do, trying to improve within that sphere, rather than just generically. I see people who do this. I think it's silly. Honest to God, I think it's silly. Software developers who take courses on writing so that they can write cleaner variable names. It's idiotic, if you ask me, because it's as I like to say, you can absolutely become the world's greatest runner if you go and, I don't know, do cycling, or you can like practice walking in order to be a long distance runner or something like that. But surely it has been proven 100 times over that in order to be a great runner, you should be running, just as like a, I don't know, a CrossFit person should be doing CrossFit. Software developers are the same sort of thing. There are things that it's like, you know, if you want to be good at software development, then you should focus on trying to learn software development and not learn higher order mathematics, even though you could improve in software by learning that stuff. So focus on the thing that you are doing rather than, you know, these sort of higher level things. It's because you can't do that later. You can always, that's a supplement, but it's not the thing that you should be focusing on. And in terms of expanding your thinking process, that's an interesting one, because documentation doesn't help you expand. It's up to you if maybe you are expanding your thinking process, but usually the tip that I give to people, if you want to be better at thinking, is to do experiments. Try to build things that you don't really understand how to make and see what happens. That is how most if you think about it historically, that is how most of humanity has progressed to the place we are today. Someone tried something weird, didn't really know what they were looking for, but they just experimented a little bit with something, and then they made an observation that was sort of interesting, and then they kept on playing around with the thing, poked the idea with the stick, and then they made a conclusion and saw, hey, this thing is sort of working like this, it sort of is this thing, and from that I can sort of understand that it's probably this thing that's going on. Cool, let's talk to that, take us some time now and tell some other people about that. Experimentation and expanding your thinking process is usually best done by doing that sort of thing, in my opinion at the very least. And so what I like to do is that I like to take on projects, as I said, that are outside of what something that I'm curious about, but I don't really know exactly what I want to do with the thing. So an example would be, if you wanted to expand your thinking process about architecture and how to do things in software, well, maybe you take a concrete problem, something that you think is a little bit difficult to get right, and you practice different ways of shuffling things around to see if you can find a better way of solving that problem. Or you try, and this is one that is also very good to keep with you, guys. Sometimes you have this idea that there's a better way of doing things, but you can't even formalize what your problem with the thing is. And then if that is the case, you have some reflection to do, because I see a lot of software developers who are like, they're on the hunt for the next big way of doing things, when they don't even understand what the problem is with their current way of doing things. And in my experience, the reason why you do that has more to do with the fact that you're bored than that there is actually a problem with the way you're doing things. This is how people go from being convinced that, I don't know, just a silly example, object-oriented programming is shit and therefore we should learn about something else, and so they're looking for something like functional programming or something like that. And when you ask them, why is the object-oriented thing not really working out for you? They struggle to actually express why this is so bad, or why a monolith is so bad, and then they say, oh, microservices are awesome. They can only state what's so great about microservices or something like that. But when you really ask them about, say, the monolithic application, they sometimes they have an idea, oh, it becomes spaghetti code, etc., etc. And then me, as the bitter old senior, I kind of go, yeah, it's true, spaghetti code does happen in monoliths, but it does happen in microservices as well. And usually the way you solve spaghetti code has very little to do with how you architect your system at like a service level. It has more to do with how you structure your modules within the source code. And I've never really found a up-and-coming fledgling or like mid-level philosopher software developer who was on the prowl for expanding their thinking process, who was open to that sort of idea, because they're sort of hell-bent on that thinking process that they have created, as opposed to actually looking for the real answer. So what I want you to take away from this is that, well, from my perspective at the very least, no, I don't think you should spend your time writing a bunch of documentation inside and outside of work, because documentation, depending on how you look at it, it has to fill a purpose, and it should not be that you should become smarter or you should improve your communication skill, because documentation is not for you usually. Unless you're journaling, you can journal, go for that if that's what you want. But if you're writing documentation, it's usually for somebody else, and so the focus should be on that person, not on you. You write the documentation so as well as you can, so that it helps somebody else. For communication skills, I urge you, figure out what the communication problems that you're you have, what are they? And if it's talking to people or expressing your thoughts and ideas, practice those skills with other people. That's what the code reviews are there for, if you do them right, in my opinion at the very least. And if you want to expand your thinking process, experiment. Play around with stuff. Try to build something that is a little bit weird, or something that sort of tries to solve a problem nobody really cares about, but you think is pretty interesting. Have you ever tried to build your own programming language? Have you ever tried to, I don't know, create like a bundler, or have you tried to, in like my case, I'm trying to basically create a side project. I'm trying to use AI or deep learning algorithms to basically simulate evolution at a very silly little level. It's it's probably not going to be like the real thing. I'll tell you if I invent this cyber world that's sort of like the Matrix, I promise, and we'll make a video about that. But it's just a quirky thing that I'm doing. I'm probably going to fail, but it's something that I've already learned a few things about machine learning that I thought was pretty cool. You could try that. Experiment with stuff. That's how we got from figuring out that, hey, this fire thing that came from a lightning bolt or something that struck down, we could actually do the same thing if we just really, really, really rub the two sticks together. And imagine the first monkey or ancestor we had who figured out, who was just rubbing stuff together because it was fun, and then fucking hell, a flame came from that thing. Imagine the shock. Have a great day.